His fiancée raised her hand to slap the maid. Then the billionaire saw her wedding ring. Nobody expected the evening to end like this. The ballroom of the Blackwood estate glittered under 1,000 crystal lights, champagne glasses chiming, laughter rolling across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. And in the middle of all that beauty, a hand was raised in anger. Victoria Sinclair's palm hovered in the air, trembling with fury, aimed straight at the face of a woman in a plain gray uniform. A maid named Clara Hayes, who stood frozen, one arm wrapped protectively around a small wide-eyed girl. "You clumsy little nothing," Victoria hissed, loud enough for the nearest guests to turn and stare. "Do you know whose dress you just ruined?" Clara didn't run. She didn't argue. She simply lowered her head, the way people do when they have learned, through years of hard living, that silence is sometimes the only shield they have left. The slap never landed. Because at that exact moment, Ethan Blackwood, Billionaire CEO, a man who had not lost his composure in a boardroom in over a decade, crossed the ballroom in 3 long strides and caught his fiancée's wrist midair. He wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at Clara's hand. At the thin gold band on her finger, scratched and worn, but unmistakable. A ring with a tiny engraved rose on the inside curve, a detail no jeweler in the world would know to copy. Because Ethan had designed that ring himself. 7 years ago. For a woman he had buried in his heart the day he was told she had died. His face went pale. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Where," he said, "did you get that ring?" Nobody in that ballroom knew it yet, but the life they all thought they understood was about to fall apart, and the truth, when it finally came, would break some hearts and heal others forever. But to understand this moment we have to go back. Back to where it all began. Welcome back, dear friend. If you are here, it means you love stories that make you feel something real. Stories about hidden truths, quiet strength, and the kind of love that refuses to die even when the whole world insists it's gone. Tonight's story will take you somewhere deep. It's about a mother who lost everything except her will to protect her daughter. A little girl whose innocent words will one day shake an entire family to its core. And a powerful man who built an empire out of grief, never knowing the woman he mourned was closer than he ever imagined. There will be tears in this story. There will be anger and injustice, and moments that will make you want to reach through the screen and pull that little girl into a hug. But I promise you this, by the end there will also be healing. There will be justice. There will be a reunion so long overdue it will make your chest ache in the best way. So settle in, because this is going to be a long, emotional journey, and I don't want you to miss a single second of it. This is the story of Clara Hayes, Lily Hayes, and the billionaire who never stopped searching, even when he didn't know he was searching at all. Clara Hayes woke up every morning at 4:45 a.m., long before the sun touched the edges of the small apartment she shared with her daughter. The apartment had 1 bedroom, a leaking faucet nobody had ever fixed, and a heater that only worked if you hit it twice on the left side. But it was theirs, and Clara had learned to be grateful for small, solid things. She would make breakfast first. Always for Lily. Always something warm even when the refrigerator held almost nothing else. Then she'd braid her daughter's hair with careful, practiced fingers, kiss her forehead, and drop her off at Mrs. Delgado's, the elderly neighbor who watched a handful of children for a few dollars an hour, before catching 2 buses across the city to the Blackwood estate. Clara had been a maid there for 8 months. Before that, she had been a nurse's assistant, a waitress, a seamstress, anything that would pay rent and keep food on the table. Nobody at the estate knew her history. Nobody knew that the woman scrubbing marble floors on her knees had once walked through art galleries in silk dresses, had once had a name spoken with warmth in the highest circles of society. That life was gone now. Buried, along with a version of herself she rarely allowed herself to remember. What people saw was a quiet woman who kept her head down, who worked twice as hard as anyone else, who never complained even when her hands cracked from the cold cleaning water in winter. Mrs. Harper, the head housekeeper, often found her staying late, polishing silver nobody would notice, just to earn a little extra. "You don't have to prove anything to me, dear," Mrs. Harper told her once. "I'm not proving it to you," Clara had said softly. "I'm proving it to her." She nodded toward a photo in her locker, a small, worn picture of Lily laughing on a swing set. Clara never spoke about Lily's father. When new staff asked, she simply said, "It's just us," in a tone that closed the door on further questions. But sometimes, late at night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Clara would sit by the window and touch the old gold ring on her finger, the one she never removed, not even to wash dishes, not even to sleep. She would trace the tiny engraved rose with her thumb and whisper, so quietly that even the walls could barely hear her, "I kept my promise. I never took it off." Nobody at the Blackwood estate knew what that ring meant. Nobody knew the story behind those tired eyes that still, somehow, held so much love. But love like Clara's doesn't disappear just because life gets hard. It just goes quiet, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. And that moment was closer than she could have imagined. Lily Hayes was 4 years old, and she had a habit of humming when she was thinking hard about something. A soft, tuneless little melody that Clara always said sounded like thinking music. She had her mother's dark curls and a laugh that came easily and often, the kind of laugh that made strangers on the bus smile without meaning to. She collected rocks she thought were special, lined them up on the windowsill by color, and gave each one a name. She talked to birds outside their apartment window as if they understood every word. But what made Lily different, what made Mrs. Delgado shake her head in wonder some days, was how much the little girl noticed. She noticed when Clara's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She noticed when grown-ups were sad even when they said they were fine. Once, she'd walked up to a crying stranger at the park, patted her knee and said, "It's okay to be sad. My mommy says feelings need somewhere to go." Clara had no idea where Lily had learned to say things like that. She simply had. Lily also had a talent nobody quite expected from a 4-year-old. She could remember faces and details with startling clarity. She could describe a person she'd met only once, months earlier, down to the color of their tie or the way they laughed. Clara used to joke that her daughter had a little detective's brain, never imagining how important that gift would become. Some evenings, when Clara brought Lily along to the estate because childcare fell through, the little girl would sit quietly in the servants' hallway with her rock collection, humming her thinking music, watching everything and everyone with wide, curious eyes. The household staff adored her. Even Margaret Blackwood, Ethan's grandmother, who rarely warmed to anyone quickly, found herself charmed the first time Lily solemnly presented her with the smoothest rock in the whole world as a gift. "Such an old soul in such a small body," Margaret murmured, watching the girl skip away. She didn't know yet how right she was. Lily didn't understand titles or money or the difference between a billionaire and a bus driver. To her, kindness was kindness, and cruelty was cruelty, plain and simple. She didn't like the pretty lady who visited sometimes, the one who never smiled with her eyes, the one Lily called, privately to her mother, "the cold lady." "Why do you call her that?" Clara had asked once. Lily had shrugged, matter of fact in the way only small children can be. "Because when she looks at us, it feels like winter." Clara had laughed softly and told her not to say things like that where others could hear. But she never forgot it, because somewhere deep down she felt exactly the same way. Ethan Blackwood was 38 years old, and by every outward measure, he had everything a man could want. He ran Blackwood Industries, a company his grandfather had built from nothing, and Ethan had grown into a global name. Magazines called him one of the most eligible men in the country. His name opened doors before he even reached for the handle. And yet, most nights, Ethan sat alone in his enormous office long after everyone else had gone home, staring at nothing in particular, wondering how a man could be surrounded by so much and still feel so empty. 7 years ago, Ethan had loved a woman named Claire. Not Clara, but close enough in sound that even hearing the maid's name sometimes made something ache quietly in his chest, though he never understood why. Claire had been nobody important by society's standards, a bright, warm-hearted woman who worked at a small bookstore near his university. She hadn't cared about his family's money. She used to tease him for wearing suits on weekends. He had loved her fiercely, quietly, the way men do when they've never had to fight for anything before and suddenly find something worth fighting for. Then, one terrible week, everything fell apart. Claire vanished without warning. Weeks later, his family's lawyer delivered devastating news. There had been an accident. She was gone. There was even a small, private funeral Ethan had been too broken to properly remember, arranged so quickly and quietly by people close to his family that he never thought to question it. He had built walls after that. He threw himself into the company, expanded it across 3 continents, and told himself that love was a luxury he'd already spent. When Victoria Sinclair entered his life 2 years ago, beautiful, sharp, socially perfect, it had felt less like falling in love and more like settling into an arrangement that made sense on paper. His grandmother Margaret never fully trusted her. Ethan told himself that didn't matter. He didn't know that Claire had never died at all. He didn't know that grief had been engineered around him like a stage set, built by people who had far more to gain from his broken heart than he could have ever imagined. What Ethan did know was this. Lately something felt wrong. A weight in his chest he couldn't name. He found himself watching the quiet new maid sometimes, the one who kept her eyes down and her sleeves pulled low, and feeling a strange, aching familiarity he couldn't place, like a song heard from another room, close enough to recognize, too far away to name. He told himself it was nothing. He was wrong. Victoria Sinclair had learned early in life that status was the only currency that truly mattered, and she had spent every year since collecting it like other people collect memories. She was beautiful in the practiced, polished way of someone who had never once left the house without checking a mirror 3 times. She wore her family name like armor. Sinclair Textiles, old money, older reputation. But everyone who truly knew Victoria understood that beneath the designer gowns was a woman terrified of ever being ordinary again. Her engagement to Ethan Blackwood was, to Victoria, the final piece of a plan she had been building for years. Not love, control. Not partnership, position. She had studied Ethan the way a general studies a battlefield, learning exactly which parts of himself he kept locked away, and exactly how to appear as though she understood his pain without ever actually easing it. She hated the new maid on sight, though she couldn't quite say why, only that something about the quiet woman with the tired eyes made Victoria's skin prickle with an unease she refused to examine too closely. "There's something about her," Victoria told her closest friend, Olivia Reed, over lunch one afternoon. "The way she moves. The way she never looks anyone in the eye. I don't like it." "She's a maid, Victoria," Olivia said, sipping her wine. "She's supposed to be invisible." "Nothing about her feels invisible to me," Victoria murmured, and something cold passed behind her eyes. What none of the wedding guests, none of the household staff, not even Ethan himself yet understood, was that Victoria's unease wasn't paranoia. It was memory, fighting to surface from somewhere she had buried it deep years ago, when she made a choice she told herself she'd never regret. Victoria was cruel to the staff in small, calculated ways. A comment here, a demand there, always polished enough to seem like simple high standards rather than what it truly was. She was especially cold toward the little girl who sometimes wandered the halls, though she never could explain, even to herself, why the sight of that small, curious face made her stomach twist with something dangerously close to guilt. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself the past was buried where it belonged. She had no idea the past was about to walk right up to her in a gray uniform, wearing a ring she recognized instantly, and had spent 7 years praying she would never see again. The first incident happened on a rainy Tuesday. Lily, waiting in the servants' hallway while her mother finished a shift, accidentally knocked over a small vase of flowers reaching for a dropped rock. Victoria, passing by, didn't yell. She simply looked at the little girl with such cold disdain that Lily instinctively stepped back and went quiet for the rest of the afternoon. Mrs. Harper, watching from down the hall, felt her chest tighten with something like fury she had no right, as staff, to express. The second incident came a week later. Clara had stayed 20 minutes past her shift to finish polishing a hallway of mirrors, and Victoria found her there. "This is why people like you stay people like you," Victoria said, examining a smudge Clara had already begun wiping away. "No attention to detail." Clara said nothing. She simply finished the mirror, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with something she refused to let fall. The third incident was smaller but somehow crueler. Lily had drawn a picture, a family of stick figures under a bright yellow sun, and left it on a side table near the kitchen, hoping someone might notice it. Victoria found it, glanced at it for half a second, and told a passing staff member to clear this clutter before it was thrown away. Lily searched for her drawing for an hour before giving up, quietly, the way children learn to give up when they sense the world has already decided their feelings don't matter. The fourth incident happened at a small family dinner Clara wasn't meant to attend, only passing through to deliver something to the kitchen. Victoria made a comment about certain people breeding children they can't afford to raise properly, loud enough to make sure Clara heard it on her way past. Margaret Blackwood, seated at the table, set down her fork with a sharp clink and said nothing, but her eyes followed Victoria for the rest of the evening with a new, careful suspicion. The fifth incident was the quietest, and the one that stayed with Clara the longest. Ethan had passed her in the hallway, and for one brief second, their eyes had met. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, recognition, something he couldn't name. And for one terrifying heartbeat Clara thought, he knows. Then he blinked, shook his head slightly as if clearing static from a radio, and walked on. Clara went home that night and held Lily a little tighter than usual. What none of them knew yet was that these small cruelties, these quiet moments of disrespect, were only the surface. Beneath the estate's polished floors, something far larger was beginning to stir, and it would not stay buried much longer. It started with a phone call Mrs. Harper wasn't meant to overhear. She had gone to fetch extra linens from the study when she heard Victoria's voice, low and sharp, coming from behind a half-closed door. "I don't care what it costs," Victoria was saying. "I need to know if she's said anything, if she remembers anything, if anyone at that estate has connected her to." She stopped abruptly, as if sensing she'd said too much, even to whoever was on the other end of the line. "Just handle it. The way we handled it before." Mrs. Harper stood frozen in the hallway, linens forgotten in her arms, before quietly backing away. Days later, James Carter, Ethan's head of security, received an unusual instruction from his employer. "Run a background check," Ethan said, staring at a photograph of Clara that had appeared, almost accidentally, in a group staff photo Margaret had asked him to review. Quietly. "I don't want anyone to know." "May I ask why, sir?" Ethan hesitated, his fingers tightening slightly around the photograph. "I don't know yet. I just need to know." James began digging, and what he found troubled him more than he expected. Clara Hayes's employment records, background checks, even her old apartment leases, they all began cleanly, crisply, exactly 8 years ago. Before that, there was almost nothing. No school records under that name in the city she claimed to be from. No family listed anywhere. It was as if Clara Hayes had simply appeared out of thin air. Meanwhile, Dr. Daniel Brooks, the family's longtime physician, found an old file buried in his archives that he hadn't looked at in years. Medical records for a young woman named Claire Whitmore, closed and sealed with a note referencing the Sinclair arrangement. His hands trembled slightly as he read it. He had signed off on a death certificate 7 years ago that he now, looking at the details again, could not fully account for. And in Victoria's private study, in a drawer she kept locked at all times, sat a folded document. Old, slightly yellowed, a payment record from 7 years ago made out to a private clinic, with a single line item that read simply, "Relocation and silence, CW." Nobody had put the pieces together yet. Not fully. But threads that had been carefully hidden for 7 years were beginning, one by one, to come loose. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it, even if no one could yet say what it was. James Carter found the connection at 2 a.m., alone in his office, surrounded by printouts and old photographs. He had cross-referenced Clara Hayes's fingerprints, taken routinely as part of estate security protocol for staff, against an old missing persons database, more out of thoroughness than expectation. The match came back instantly. Clara Hayes was, biologically, registered under a different name entirely. Claire Whitmore. A woman declared legally deceased 7 years ago. A woman whose case file had been closed unusually fast, signed off by a single doctor, with no autopsy on record. James sat back in his chair, his coffee going cold beside him, staring at the screen in stunned silence. He knew immediately what this meant. He knew immediately how dangerous this knowledge was. If Clara truly was Claire, if Ethan's long-lost love had been alive this entire time, working as a maid in his own household, then someone 7 years ago had gone to extraordinary lengths to make Ethan believe otherwise. And if someone had done that once, they would not hesitate to do it again to protect that secret now. James's hands hovered over his phone, torn between calling Ethan immediately and the sinking fear that revealing this too soon, too clumsily, could put Clara and her daughter in real danger. Whoever had orchestrated this before had resources, connections, and clearly no shortage of ruthlessness. He closed the file. He would need proof. Real, undeniable proof before he brought this to Ethan. He did not yet know that time was running out faster than he thought, because 2 floors above him, Victoria had just received a text message that made her blood run cold. She matched something in a background scan. Someone's getting close. Victoria stared at her phone for a long moment, her carefully composed face slipping, just for a second, into something close to panic. "Not again," she whispered to the empty room. "I will not lose everything again." Clara felt it before she understood it. A shift in the air, a tightening in her chest that wouldn't ease no matter how many deep breaths she took. Mrs. Harper had been unusually gentle with her lately, offering her tea without being asked, watching her with an expression Clara couldn't quite place. James Carter had passed her in the hallway twice that week, each time pausing a half-second too long, as if he wanted to say something and thought better of it. Clara told herself she was imagining things. She told herself the same thing she told herself for 7 years. Keep your head down, protect your daughter, don't ask questions that might unravel the fragile safety you've built from nothing. But some nights, lying awake in the dark apartment, she let herself remember. Not everything, never everything it hurt too much, but pieces. The warmth of a hand around hers. A promise made in a garden that smelled like jasmine. A name spoken with such tenderness it still made her chest ache to think of it. Ethan. She remembered the night everything changed, being pulled from her old life so suddenly, so completely, told that if she ever tried to return, if she ever tried to contact him, something terrible would happen to the family that had nothing to do with any of this. She remembered being handed money, papers, a new name, and being told this was the only way to keep everyone safe, including the baby she hadn't even told Ethan she was carrying yet. She had believed it. She had been so afraid, so alone, so certain she had no choice. Now, watching Lily hum her thinking music at the kitchen table, 4 years old and utterly unaware of the storm gathering above her small, bright world, Clara felt the old fear rise up again, sharper than ever. Someone knows, a voice inside her whispered. Someone is starting to know. She looked at Lily's face, Ethan's eyes unmistakably staring back at her every single day, and wondered, not for the first time, whether the secret she had carried for so long was protecting her daughter, or slowly stealing away the only chance either of them had left at something real. She didn't sleep that night. She simply held her daughter close and waited for whatever was coming. The engagement gala was, by every measure, the social event of the year. The Blackwood ballroom had been transformed, white orchids cascading from crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly near the grand staircase, champagne towers glittering under warm golden light. 300 guests moved through the space in silk and diamonds, every conversation buzzing with the same question. When would Ethan Blackwood and Victoria Sinclair finally set a wedding date? Victoria moved through the crowd like she was born for exactly this moment, greeting guests with practiced warmth, her hand resting possessively on Ethan's arm at every photograph. But underneath the surface, she was unraveling. She had barely slept in days. Every laugh felt too loud. Every glance from staff felt like it carried a question she wasn't ready to answer. Ethan, for his part, felt strangely disconnected from his own engagement party, watching the glittering room from somewhere slightly outside himself. His grandmother Margaret had asked him twice that evening if he was all right, and both times he'd said yes, though he wasn't entirely certain it was true. Clara had been asked to help with the event, staying late to assist with the catering staff even though it wasn't her usual role. Mrs. Harper had specifically requested her, though Clara didn't know why. She'd had no choice but to bring Lily along again. Childcare had fallen through at the last minute, and the little girl sat quietly in a side hallway near the kitchen, humming to herself, watching the glittering party through a gap in the doorway. It was there that Lily saw something that made her small body go very still. She saw the cold lady, Victoria, pull a folded piece of paper from her clutch and hand it, quickly and nervously, to a woman Lily didn't recognize, whispering urgently. She saw the woman glance toward the kitchen hallway, toward exactly where Clara stood, before slipping the paper into her coat and disappearing into the crowd. Lily didn't understand what she'd seen, but some instinct, some quiet inner alarm, told her it mattered. She tugged at her mother's apron a moment later, tears suddenly welling in her eyes for reasons Clara couldn't understand, whispering, "Mommy, the cold lady is planning something bad. I saw it." Clara knelt down immediately, brushing hair from her daughter's face. "What did you see, baby?" But before Lily could answer, a crash echoed from the ballroom. A tray of champagne glasses, knocked from a server's hands as Victoria swept past too quickly, her nerves finally fraying in public. And in the chaos of gasps and hurried cleanup, Clara stood, stepping instinctively toward the mess to help. That was the moment Victoria saw her, saw Clara's hand steady a falling glass, saw the worn gold ring catching the ballroom light. And something in Victoria's carefully controlled composure finally snapped. "You," Victoria breathed, her voice shaking with a fury that had 7 years of fear buried underneath it. "You're supposed to be gone." The ballroom nearest them went quiet, guests turning at the sudden sharpness in her tone. Clara froze, every instinct screaming at her to disappear, to apologize, to make herself small the way she always had. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I was only trying to help." "Don't you dare speak to me," Victoria snapped, and her hand rose, trembling with a rage that had clearly been building far longer than this single moment. Lily, small and fierce, stepped instantly in front of her mother, her 4-year-old body shielding Clara the only way she knew how, tears streaming freely down her face now. "Don't hurt my mommy," she cried out, her voice carrying high and clear across the sudden hush of the ballroom. "You already took her ring away once. I heard you on the phone. You said, 'Make sure Claire stays gone forever.'" The entire ballroom fell into stunned, absolute silence. Victoria's raised hand froze mid-air, her face draining of all color. And across the room, Ethan Blackwood, who had been making his way toward the commotion, stopped dead in his tracks, because the name the little girl had just shouted, in that trembling, tear-filled voice, was a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in 7 long years. Claire. His eyes moved, slowly, disbelievingly, from the little girl's tear-streaked face to the woman she was protecting, to the gold ring on her finger, the one with a tiny engraved rose only he and one jeweler in the entire world had ever known about. The room around him blurred. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He crossed the ballroom in 3 long strides and caught Victoria's wrist before the slap could land. And in that same breath, everything the story had promised at the very beginning finally arrived. "Where," he said, his voice breaking on the words, "did you get that ring?" Clara's whole body trembled. 7 years of carefully guarded silence rose in her throat, and for a long, terrible moment, she couldn't speak at all. It was Margaret Blackwood who broke the silence, moving forward through the stunned crowd with the sharp clarity of a woman who had suspected something was wrong for a very long time. "Let her speak, Ethan," she said quietly. "Let her finally speak." Clara looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes directly for the first time in 7 years, and the walls she had built around herself for so long finally, painfully, began to crumble. "My name is Claire Whitmore," she said, her voice shaking but steady enough to carry. "I never died. I was 7 months away from marrying you when Victoria and her family paid a clinic and a doctor to fake my death and relocate me somewhere I could never find my way back to you. I was told that if I ever tried to contact you, something terrible would happen to your grandmother, to the company, to you. I was pregnant, Ethan. I was terrified. I believed I had no choice but to disappear and protect our child the only way I could." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Ethan's face had gone white, his hand still gripping Victoria's wrist, his mind struggling to catch up to words that changed the entire shape of the last 7 years of his life. "Our child," he repeated, barely a whisper. Clara's eyes moved to Lily, still standing protectively in front of her. Small chin lifted, fierce and unafraid despite her tears. "This is Lily," Clara said. "She's 4 years old. She's yours, Ethan. She's always been yours." Victoria yanked her wrist free, stumbling back, her carefully built world collapsing in real time in front of 300 witnesses. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, her voice cracking. "I was protecting my future. I was engaged to you first, before she ever showed up in your life. And then suddenly you were choosing some bookstore girl over everything You paid people to fake a woman's death," Margaret cut in, ice in her voice. "You separated a father from his child for 7 years, out of jealousy." James Carter stepped forward then, holding a folder in his hands, the proof he'd been gathering all week, now offered without hesitation. "I can confirm the biometric match, sir. Clara Hayes and Claire Whitmore are the same person. I was going to bring this to you privately tonight." Ethan looked down at Lily, really looked at her, for the first time understanding why she had always felt so strangely, achingly familiar. Her eyes. They were his eyes, looking back at him, full of a fear no 4-year-old should ever have to carry. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her height. His own eyes filling with tears he made no effort to hide. "Hi, Lily," he said softly, his voice breaking. I think I'm your dad." The gala did not end in celebration. It ended in chaos, whispers, and the slow, painful unraveling of secrets that had been buried for 7 years. Security escorted Victoria to a private room, where she sat in stunned silence as her lawyer was called, her carefully built reputation collapsing faster than she could process. Olivia Reed, realizing the depth of what she had helped conceal all those years ago, quietly confessed everything to James Carter before the night was through. The clinic, the payments, the threats made to a frightened, pregnant young woman who had trusted the wrong people at the worst possible moment. Dr. Daniel Brooks came forward the next morning, shaking, to formally correct the medical record he had been pressured into signing 7 years earlier. "I've carried this for 7 years," he admitted to Ethan, unable to meet his eyes. "I told myself I had no choice. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." Ethan spent that first night simply sitting with Clara and Lily in a quiet room away from the chaos. 3 people trying to understand 7 stolen years all at once. There were tears, so many tears, but there was also something Clara hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. Relief. The unbearable weight of a secret she had carried alone finally being shared. "I looked for you," Ethan told her quietly, his hand trembling as he reached for hers. "For months after they told me you were gone, I couldn't accept it. I kept thinking I saw you in crowds. I never stopped, not really. I just eventually had to stop looking because it hurt too much to keep hoping. I thought about you every single day," Clara whispered back. "Every time Lily laughed, I saw you in her. I was so afraid that keeping the ring, keeping your name in my heart, would put her in danger. Sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you." "You don't have to apologize," Ethan said, his voice fierce with quiet emotion. "None of this was your fault. Not 1 second of it." Lily, exhausted from the long, strange night, had fallen asleep curled between them, her small hand still gripping her mother's sleeve even in sleep. Ethan looked down at his daughter, a whole person he had missed 4 years of, and felt grief and joy tangled together so tightly in his chest he could barely breathe. Margaret Blackwood, watching quietly from the doorway, finally allowed herself to cry, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of watching a wrong finally begin to be made right. "Welcome home," she whispered to both of them. "Welcome home, both of you." 6 months later, the Blackwood estate looked much the same on the outside. The same gardens, the same grand staircase, the same marble floors Clara had once scrubbed on her knees. But inside everything had changed. Clara no longer wore a maid's uniform. She had spent the first weeks after that night in careful, quiet conversations with Ethan, rebuilding trust one honest exchange at a time, refusing to rush what 7 years of pain had broken. There was no dramatic overnight fairy tale, only slow, deliberate healing, built on understanding rather than assumption. Lily had a bedroom now with a window seat overlooking the garden, where she kept her rock collection lined up by color, exactly as she always had, though now each rock had a small handwritten label in her father's careful handwriting, helping her learn to spell each color's name. She had grown even more confident, more curious, more herself. No longer a small girl watching cruelty from hallway shadows, but a child who laughed loudly and often, secure in the knowledge that she was deeply, fiercely loved. Clara had gone back to school part-time, something she'd never had the chance to finish, pursuing early childhood education. Inspired, she said, by watching how much a little bit of kindness had shaped her own daughter's resilience. She insisted on it, even though Ethan would have happily given her anything she asked for. "I want to build something for myself too," she told him. "Not instead of us. Alongside it." Mrs. Harper still worked at the estate, though these days she and Clara shared tea in the kitchen as equals rather than employer and employee, laughing over memories of that terrifying, transformative night. James Carter had been promoted, entrusted now with far more than security, trusted above all with the truth. Margaret Blackwood doted on Lily in a way the household had never seen her dote on anyone, sneaking her sweets before dinner and teaching her, patiently, how to properly greet dinner guests, though Lily still preferred handing out smooth rocks instead. Ethan had changed too, in quieter ways. He left the office earlier now. He learned to braid hair, clumsily at first, much to Lily's amusement. He kept a photo on his desk, not the polished professional photos his assistant usually chose, but a slightly blurry one of Clara and Lily laughing in the garden, because he said it was the first photo that ever felt completely real. The gray, quiet apartment with a leaking faucet was gone from their lives now, but Clara kept one thing from it always. A small drawing Lily had made long ago, of 3 stick figures under a bright yellow sun, rescued and reframed, hanging now in a hallway where everyone could see it. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale. Healing rarely is. But it was real, and it was theirs, built one honest day at a time. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon months after the gala, while Clara was sorting through an old box of belongings from her original apartment, finally ready to look through what she'd left behind. Tucked inside a worn paperback book, one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep hidden from the people who'd relocated her all those years ago, she found a letter she didn't remember writing. It was addressed to Ethan, written in her own shaking handwriting, dated just 2 days before her forced disappearance. It was a letter she had clearly intended to send and never had the chance to. In it, she'd written about the pregnancy she hadn't yet told him about how frightened and overjoyed she was, about how she couldn't wait to see his face when she finally told him he was going to be a father. At the very bottom, in ink slightly smudged from what must have been tears 7 years old, she had written, "No matter what happens, no matter how far apart we ever end up, I will make sure this baby knows they were made from real love. I promise you that, Ethan. I promise our child that." Clara sat on the floor of the study, hands trembling, reading words she had completely forgotten writing, from a woman who had no idea yet just how far she would have to go to keep that exact promise. She brought the letter to Ethan that evening. He read it twice in complete silence, then looked up at her with eyes full of tears. "You kept your promise," he said softly. "Even when you had no idea if you'd ever see me again. Even when it would have been so much easier to let it go." "I never could," Clara said simply. "Some promises aren't choices. They're just who you are." That night, they framed the letter together and hung it beside Lily's rescued drawing. 2 small pieces of a love story that had survived 7 years of separation, lies, and heartbreak, finally standing side by side where they belonged. If this story teaches us anything, it's that the truth has a way of surviving, even when powerful people try very hard to bury it. Clara could have let fear silence her forever. She could have let 7 years of loss convince her that speaking up would only make things worse. But she held on to something quieter and stronger than fear, a promise to her daughter, a thread of love she refused to let go of, even in her darkest, loneliest moments. And Lily, sweet, brave 4-year-old Lily, reminds us that courage doesn't always look like grand gestures. Sometimes it looks like a small child stepping in front of the person she loves, refusing to stay silent about something that felt wrong, even when she didn't fully understand why. Ethan's story reminds us that grief and love aren't always what they seem from the outside. Sometimes the wealthiest, most successful people are carrying the heaviest hearts, quietly hoping for a chance to make things right that they never even knew they were missing. And Victoria's downfall reminds us of something important too. That status and control, no matter how carefully built, cannot stand forever on a foundation of lies. Truth has patience. Wait. And eventually it finds its way home. Kindness costs nothing, but its absence can cost everything. A moment of cruelty towards someone we assume has no power can unravel in ways we never expect. And a moment of quiet courage, from someone as small as a 4-year-old girl, can change the course of an entire family's future. Love, real love, doesn't disappear just because the world tries to bury it. Wait. Survives. And when the truth finally comes to light, it comes home. Now I want to hear from you. Which moment touched you the most? The instant Lily stepped in front of her mother, or the moment Ethan recognized that ring and everything inside him changed? Did you see the twist coming, or did it catch you completely off guard? And here's a question worth sitting with. If you were in Clara's position, forced into an impossible choice to protect the people you love, what would you have done differently, and what would you have done exactly the same? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing which parts of these stories stay with you long after the video ends. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It helps this channel more than you know. And subscribe if you want more emotional, heartfelt stories just like this one, dropping every single week. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next journey. Thank you for spending this time with me and with Clara, Lily, and Ethan. I'll see you in the next story.